Welcome to Thriller Premium. Welcome to Thriller Premium. Gathering all the information you would need to stay ahead of the curve on your crypto investments.
Welcome to Thriller Rundown.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls from around the world. Gather around. It's time for another exciting episode of Thriller Rundown. Today is March 25th, 2020, and we are talking currency wars at the top. That's right. A whole lot of digital is going on, and it starts with the dollar. Let's do it. The Rundown, starting now.
The Rundown.
All right. So today we are talking currency wars and how it's beginning to start. And it started, I would say, as soon as we saw Bitcoin climb back up. Seriously. So if I'm going to recap you all in the beginning so we can kind of get to the meat, the juicy part, right? So if you haven't heard, we have this thing called the coronavirus. It's taken over the entire world, right? All production has stopped. People are not going to work here in the United States. And it's just not a good time to be alive right now, right? So I'm trying to keep it composed. I've been locked in my house for like 3 weeks. So it all started last year, right? We heard Facebook get in front of the Senate. They started saying, hey, we're going to make our own Libra token, and yada, yada, yada. We knew all that and how that turned out. Basically woke everybody up. And then we have China last year. They were about to release a digital dollar. Then they held off for a little bit. Who knows why? It's kind of funny because we got more news, and I'll discuss that later. But we have the Senate, and then the Senate just are trying to get a bill passed because the majority of Americans here are hurting right now. So they're trying to create a relief bill that will not only help a lot of workers and families out there, but it'll also introduce something called a digital dollar. And the language that they used was very sparse. Like, there really wasn't a lot to it. Basically said that the Fed would inject digital dollars into a digital wallet, and for the most part, it would be highly controlled. And a lot of our own people in our space were like, well, you know what that means? That means they're going to control our money. And then now, we always have Andreas talk about how the government can just seize your money. Well, now they can really just seize anything they want if they start controlling this UBI that they'll be sending out to people here in the next, month or so. So all that is going on, but we're not talking about that just yet. We're talking about the currency wars. And the reason I bring this up is because this is about to begin. And knowing the way we do research here, we're probably like 3 months ahead, right? Especially in the crypto space. A lot of us are on faster timetables than the rest of the financial world. So you'll start hearing more about this here in the next month or so. But today it was also released that China is reportedly working with their own private industry, and they have the likes of the People's Bank of China that are going to be issuing out the first official digital yuan, and they have some big financial arms of e-commerce out there to help them. They have Alibaba, Tencent. We also know they have Huawei that are already on board. So they have everything in place to release their own digital yuan. But according to an insider, and this is really interesting, this person said, judging from the patents, the first step of technological development has been basically completed. But they also mentioned how, and this is coming from Zhao Pingzhu, he also warned that Chinese economic plans could face a number of hurdles, including possible complications from overseas. He wrote, if the United States Federal Reserve were to decide to work with Facebook and co-launch a digital currency pegged to the dollar, that could also facilitate cross-border transactions. This type of financial intrusion could be fatal. So he went on to say that if a digital dollar or a successful Facebook Libra launch that somehow replaces the dollar would see American currencies rule the world for another 100 years. China should be prepared to fend off such risk. So these are some very poignant opinions coming from Zhao, but it to me, it reads like they are not going down without trying to inject their digital yuan into their own economy. And possibly, we'll see how that plays out. But if history tells us anything, they're going to try to fend off risk from a digital dollar, especially if it got announced this past week. That's why you saw Bitcoin go crazy, right? And then immediately, I think like a day later, the block reported how the section, the passage, I think it's like a 4,000 page document, the bill, but on 1024, on page 1024, they removed that part of where it says the digital dollar. And we don't know, like, unfortunately, being an American citizen, you can't see the bill until it gets passed. That's when you find out what was in the bill. But we won't know if it was still left off or not until this gets passed here in the next couple of days. Hopefully by the end of the weekend, we'll find out if the digital dollar is still in there. Either way, if you go even further, and that's what I do, I like to go a little further and find out exactly what is going on. If you go even further, you come to realize that the digital dollar is primarily going to be looked at from the Digital Dollar Project. And this is coming from John Carlo, the previous, he was the previous or former chairman of the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or better known as the CFTC. And it's interesting, he's working directly with the Federal Reserve to do this. And what's even more interesting, gosh, it just gets better. What's even more interesting is they have a company that's backing them, and they're called Accenture. And if you look, and I posted it on Twitter, if you look at their stock price, well, guess what happened? It shot up. So it's trading at $156 right now. But it's funny how, like, as soon as they released the news of the digital dollar, I'm sure somebody, I'm sure it was somebody that with insider knowledge added that in there. And then as soon as everybody found out about it, as soon as people found out like who's working with the Fed to create this digital dollar, it got redacted, right? And so now we're like told, hey, it might not show up in there, but the cat's already out of the bag. Everybody knows what the United States already kind of tipped their hand to the rest of the world, that they're making a digital dollar now, whether they are or not. And so I went ahead and looked up who the company they're working with. Of course, they're working with John Carlo. But what's interesting is there's a company behind them that's called Accenture. Their stock price rose up earlier this week before the news got announced. So that tells us, like, where there's smoke, there's fire. If you look further down, they have David Treat, who is also on the board of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. And then you have Crypto Twitter talking about how it's very possible we will see an Ethereum private-based blockchain from the digital dollar. I don't know if that's true. But if I'm looking at the people involved in this digital dollar project and who are working directly with the Fed to create a digital dollar, and if one of the main people on the board is David Treat and he's in the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, well, there's a good chance they're going to use either going to use Hyperledger or they're going to use Ethereum at some part in the process. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting time here in the next 18 to 24 months. And it's kind of funny because this is all going in kind of, in a steadfast way, because you have Bitcoin just on a tear here recently. And with the amount of money that's just been printed or that will be printed, I think we're going to reach something like 6 trillion, right? Here in just this week alone, if everything gets passed. It's going to be crazy to think in the future how this can continue, right? And we know there's the great thing about Bitcoin is the amount of Satoshis, right, in one Bitcoin. And let's say this continues. Let's say, the digital dollar, leaps, into existence, and then they're able to keep digitally printing more digital dollars, and we go from 21 trillion to now we have 500 trillion. And then next thing you know, we reach 1 quadrillion. Like, this is a very big possibility here in the next 10 years. I mean, we just went up 6 trillion here in 1 week. Or we're going to. I mean, it's just nuts to think the amount of money that's just being printed and the inflation that it's going to cause. And not only that, like, everything's going to be priced so much more. And there's so much smarter people talking about this than me. I recommend go listening to them because this is just astounding. But what I want to talk about is Bitcoin, because that's primarily my main concern, right? I want to know how this affects Bitcoin. I want to know what this looks like for Bitcoin. Well, this puts the gloves directly and the court indirectly in Bitcoin's hand, because no longer is Bitcoin chasing the dollar. Now you have the digital dollar and the Chinese yuan chasing Bitcoin, right? They're going into their playfield, right? They're going into their court. They're going into their medium of exchange, and they're trying to compete with Bitcoin. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. But what I did want to say was 100 million in one Bitcoin. That's how many Satoshis. How many Satoshis total in all of the 21 million Bitcoins? Well, that's 2 quadrillion, 100 trillion. So let's say they are able to keep printing these dollars. We can get up to $1 per Satoshi if they want to, especially if it gets to the 2 quadrillion stage for United States dollars that have been printed and not paid. And who knows? Never say never. I don't think anybody in their right mind would ever said in 1973 that we would still be printing like this, right? Just out of thin air. And we'll get more into that into 5 good minutes. But yeah, I think Bitcoin for right now, I was bullish before this recession started. And now that this recession is hopefully coming to an end, with after all this printing, you would think it would come to an end, right? I'm even more bullish on Bitcoin than I was before. And I don't know how that's possible. I'm serious. I'm not even joking. I don't know how that's possible. I think at this point, they've already showed all their cards. They've already told us what they're going to do. And at this point, the currency wars have begun. It's Bitcoin, it's China trying to, push back against the United States dollar and their move into the digital space. It's China also trying to push on their digital yuan from the People's Bank of China. And then there's, private interests with Facebook trying to do their thing, right? And then we also have the ECB, right? So there's just a lot going on right now. And if there's one thing that you should be ready for, you're gonna have to make, at some point, most consumers out there will have to make a choice of where they want to store their money, right? And if I'm paid in some Fed coin or something, right, and I'm asked where I want to store it, where I want to keep my value, I'm storing my savings in Bitcoin, and I'm no longer looking at the dollar as a long-term hold, right? Especially with this amount of $1 trillion printing that's going on. It's really bad. It's really bad. And there's a lot of finance guys talking about how this doesn't end well. And there's other finance people that are even saying that this can go on for another decade, possibly 2 decades, possibly 3, that this could go on forever. So it's really going to be a crazy time for volatility in the markets going forward. And it's a good thing we're already in crypto, so we're kind of used to it. But I think at the end of the day, this decade is you're going to see a currency war erupt, and it's going to start with the dollar and probably China. And, at some point, everybody will look at Bitcoin as the only sane money out there. So, yeah, this is really bullish for Bitcoin. The fact that they mentioned the digital dollar, this is really bullish for us. So, yeah. Buy Bitcoin. Buy Bitcoin when it's still cheap. That's what I'll say. Okay, with that, let's get into 5 good minutes.
5 good minutes.
All right. So today in 5 good minutes, we're talking QE infinity. That's right. If there ever was a day to start 5 good minutes first before the rundown, this would have been it. But let's get that timer going. Okay. So today I'm talking about QE infinity. And if you don't know what that is, that's quantitative easing infinity. That basically means the Fed can print millions, bazillions, quadrillions, trillions of dollars whenever they want at a moment's notice. And they don't need anybody's authority to do so because they operate as a separate entity away from the government. And that's all thanks to November 20th, 1910 on Jekyll Island. Yeah, it goes back that far. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So, you know, it's one of those things where the United States Federal Reserve basically said here recently on 60 Minutes that not only can they print money, but they can keep doing it forever.
You don't need to. Your ATM is safe. Your banks are safe. There's enough cash in the financial system, and there is an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve. We will do whatever we need to do to make sure that there's enough cash in the banking system.
That's from 60 Minutes on Sunday. Yeah. That's from 60 Minutes. And this woke up a lot of people. This basically confirmed everything that we've always said about the Fed. It finally confirmed for somebody like who doesn't get a lot of respect, actually. They call him a conspiracy theorist, but he's really not. He's a really great man because he kind of broke. I mean, a lot of people knew about this before, but no one connected everything. And he made a profoundly great story called The Creature from Jekyll Island. And that's G. Edward Griffin. And I highly recommend you read that. It's a really long book, but they have audio versions of it. Anyway, it pretty much puts everything that he said in that book, and it puts it out there for everybody to know that not only is the Fed its own separate entity, it could do whatever the hell it wants, and no one can do anything about it at this point. And they're going to continue to print money forever. And I'm not going to pretend that I know what's going to happen here in the short term when it comes to the dollar and fiat or anything like that, because that's not my wheelhouse. I know enough to talk about it, you know, among friends, but it's not what my expertise is. My expertise is Bitcoin and crypto and in that space. So I'll leave that. There's some really good YouTube videos from Peter Schiff talking about this. Pomp just had one where I believe who did he have on? I forget. One of the guys from the was it Money Masters podcast or something like that. But go check out those podcasts. There's some really good stuff in there, and they talk about how this financial stuff works. So I'm not going to pretend like I know what's going on with that stuff. But I will tell you how this will affect Bitcoin, because there's one thing, the monetary policies that the Fed has not only continued to do here in the short term, but the fact that they are just injecting this amount of liquidity, which is money, into the system. And wait till I get to the cold hard truth, because that's really going to upset a lot of people when they find out where that money's actually really going. But when you look at this from a Bitcoin perspective, from somebody who's a hodler or somebody who's an investor in this technology, you realize that the end game for this is infinity for them. And they're going to do whatever they have to make sure that everything stays the same and the dollar stays the reserve currency. So it's basically game on for everybody else in the world. And this is why it's very important to understand the fundamentals when it comes to Bitcoin. You know, 21 million, that hard cap that's set there by Satoshi, and every 4 years a halving, and we're coming up on that here in like 48 days. Like, this is why this was created. Bitcoin and the next recession, and when we talked about that a few months ago, this was going to be a test for it, and we were going to need to survive it. And we not only survived it, we've thrived in it. If you look at just pure aspects of the markets right now for Bitcoin, the fact that it went up 50% before anything else out there, as far as investable markets, that is just astounding. And so long term, Bitcoin looks like not only the best asset to hold, but it almost becomes a no-brainer. And by the Federal Reserve saying this on Sunday, they basically alluded to everything that we've always known. And Bitcoin wins. And that's all. That's five good minutes on QE Infinity. Let's get into the code hard truth.
The hard truth.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
All right. So today's code hard truth is, it's very upsetting. Like, when I found out this news this week, I was just kind of in shock and awe and wondering why no one else is talking about this and why it's not revealed out there in the mainstream news and why no one's getting upset on Twitter about it. Like, it's just business as usual. No big deal. Don't look here. Look over there. And, the Federal Reserve enlisted BlackRock to help with its massive debt buying programs. So the Federal Reserve tapped BlackRock Inc. to shepherd several debt buying programs on behalf of the United States Central Bank as it works to revive an economy reeling from the spread of the coronavirus. If you don't know who BlackRock is, we've done a couple of shows on them in the past. They're the world's largest asset manager. And not only, this is the kicker. So not only do they, handle everything from mortgage-backed securities to different flows of corporate debt markets, and like this one company is in charge of, I think it was like 6% of the world's holdings. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. As of what was this, January 2020, they have 63% of the staggering $7 trillion financial assets, and most of them originate in the Americas, and the rest of the 29% is in Europe. And so, if there was a shadow banking company out there, it's BlackRock. So not only did the Federal Reserve tap them to distribute this wealth, this $4 trillion, or however it's going to turn into by the end of the week, they said, hey, take this money and make sure to go ahead and give it out separately to everybody. we just printed a crap ton of it. What is happening? Like, no one is upset about this. And the kicker to all this, in 2008, when we had the last financial crisis, they asked them again. So, and the cherry on top, the massive cherry on top to all of this is the fact that not only BlackRock, not only are they the world's they are the world's largest asset manager. Make no mistake. They also have a spin-off company that they say doesn't reflect the other side, the investing side. They're separate. Because you can have two separate companies in one company. They're separate, I promise. The BlackRock Solutions are the same people who audit the Fed. And the same people who've assisted the ECB in 2016. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The Federal Reserve didn't bail out the economy. They just bailed out BlackRock. and when you say this out loud, people are just like, oh, okay. Okay, well, it makes sense. They're the world's largest asset manager. So, yeah, it makes sense, right? But what the hell? It's astounding. And, yes, they own a lot of corporations. And, yes, they are the world's largest asset manager. But at the same time, it's about principle. And it comes down to, what are we doing here? Why isn't this one corporation broke down to many? Or why aren't they being more transparent to the rest of us outside of the financial sector. Why aren't we being told this? Why do we have to go out and look for this information? And if there ever was a shadow bank in the world, BlackRock is one of them. That's very upsetting. And this is where all the trillions of dollars are going, especially when it gets created out of thin air and they don't have a need to explain why they're doing it. They just do it because they're their own separate entity. So that's the world we live in. And that's the cold hard truth. And if you don't like it, well, it's too bad. That's reality these days. It's pretty crazy. It's a pretty crazy world right now. Okay. It's been a rough couple weeks for everybody in the world, right? Maybe a rough 3 weeks. I hope you all are doing safe out there. Hope you're taking care of your families and doing everything you can to stay alive and stay healthy. It's very upsetting to hear the people in power manipulating things and doing it under the guise of the world economy. I don't think I've ever been this bullish for Bitcoin in my entire life. And that's saying a lot. I've always been bullish about Bitcoin. But this week just kind of exploded, and just kind of see exactly where this is headed. And let them keep printing. It's going to be funny when it crashes because a lot of people that hold the vast amount of wealth at that time will be the holders of Bitcoin. I don't know what's going to happen with gold. I don't know what's going to happen with the dollar in the short term. I don't know if this currency wars are going to begin and the Chinese yuan wins. I don't know these things. But I do know that there will only be 21 million Bitcoins printed. And I do know that we're going to be having a halving here in about 48 days. And I do know that the price will rise. So buy Bitcoin. See you next time.